Every 4 years, Nigerians come out to elect people into different offices. However, there's always a new wave or a new sensation. And for younger Nigerians, we've seen a lot of interest between 2015, 2019, and now 2023. Young people have achieved the level of success with the Not Young to Run bill, which was signed into law. However, what's the participation of young people? Is it in voting? Is it in participating by running for offices, or is it just by having a voice and ensuring that we are the change we want to see? Some people have ran, some won, some lost, but we want to know what's going on, and that's why we bring to you the update. My name is Andy Madaki, and with me we have
Aniekan Ani-Ezekiel.
How did this happen? Why did we start this?
So starting this, if you remember, it was you and I, obviously we met and started talking about the candidacy of people, of the people that we liked, the people that we had seen in the news. And one of the things that really struck me at the time was the fact that we didn't hear from these people after they ran.
Yeah.
Many of them ran and almost ran away in a sense. So the question was, how then do we benefit from the fact that these guys have gone through this process and perhaps may have a deeper level of understanding than we do? Because many times we only get to see what is reported, what is put out there. And just looking at the fact that we're also like we're a heavy technological generation, the idea of apps and sort of products and being able to iterate and learn on the go was something that was really good, was a really great idea. And I thought to myself, politically, how do we do this? We started having conversations with a few of my friends and with you as well as with Anyton. And that formed the backbone of the idea that there was something to be able to explore, and then being able to reach out to other people who felt a need to also, contribute to that. The ethos of this is really so that we can continue to have voter education, where we can tell ourselves and continue to contribute to that zeitgeist of political information and allow that to inform a more empowered youth political class that's very vibrant here in Nigeria. That's a really big thing, especially for 2023 and moving forward.
And thankfully, our friends at Harry Ball Foundation were able to support us. And so we have beautiful cameras and microphones and beautiful things in front of us, which is facilitating this to make it happen. Now, in the recently suspended continuous voter registration, at least 12 million people have been added to the register, and about 71% of them are between the ages of 18 to 45. However, when primaries come, less than 2,000 people sit down and decide who the major candidates are. But it's important to learn from people who have tried, who have put their hat in the race and seen how it has gone. And so we have a guest today.
Yeah.
I like this person because he's a brilliant speaker.
Yeah.
He's fashionable.
Really fashionable.
And he goes beyond the talk to actually walking the talk, and he tried to run. So who's our guest today?
Now, before I even mention him, one of the things that I liked about him is his willingness to also express and to share this, and we're very honored to be able to have Ferdinand Adimefe here with us, a creative entrepreneur who ran for the House of Reps.
Yes, House of Reps at TUSA.
House of Reps at TUSA under Alliance for New Nigeria. Lovely party name.
Yes, but unfortunately, the party is no more, right? So if you
Why
don't
is
win a
that?
seat, they get to prescribe the parties. About 90% of the parties who register every year, after election, they go away. So it's almost like a circle. And that's one of the limitations in mushroom parties. I won't call it mushroom parties, but young parties. That if you're not able to hold a seat, and to hold a seat is very, very complicated, you get deregistered, right? So for the parties that have stayed on, whether it's Accord or Labour, they've just sort of managed to keep one person in one of the elected offices. But A&M wasn't that lucky.
Okay, Freddy, I can call you that.
Yes, yes.
I'm not going to ask you why you ran because everybody asks that question.
Mm.
My question to you is, what's your definition of failure? Let's start
Hmm.
with that.
Well, I think that not getting involved, not trying at all. Personally, for me, I didn't think I lost. I'm even more aware, I'm more educated about the complications of politics. I understand the electorate even more so. Being on the streets and trying to galvanize votes, I was running for a policy office. So I would have thought that my conversation with the people that I needed votes from would be the policies we're going to use to shape the economy, the education, but they were mostly interested in executive type conversations. So for them, it was about the roads you will build, the schools you want to fix, and it was a dysfunctional way of perceiving legislature. At some point, my party and friends thought we should move our conversation away from what bills we wanted to sponsor to how many schools or routes we wanted to do. Well, that's the governor, that's the local government, right? And so there is a sense that that knowledge gap took away from the process for me, right? I would have myself trying to figure out, okay, there's constituency allowance, so we have to think about what to do with this for the people. There was not enough, lot of education. And most people were fixated on voting for presidents and governors, but they were not really, really interested in anything other than that. And if you look at the political dispensation, you find that even now, um, in any of the political parties where you're finding energy, is not translating into um, social capital or political capital for some of the parties. Because people just want, I want this president, but I don't want anybody else. So the party is successful for most of the young parties, but the people running on are struggling to fill the hall when they want to campaign on their own, right? So failure is not trying, but I think for every Nigerian who is passionate and patriotic, and you understand and you've studied history across different countries, it's a moral responsibility to get involved, and it's a moral responsibility to run.
So you speak about the complications and the things that you've learned from running. If you could sort of tell anybody else or if you could talk to the electorate, talk to those of us who vote, what is the one thing that you want us to understand? I'm just curious from this because you speak about policy versus executive, and I that even for me is not so
I think
apparent.
we have, people who talk about having 70% youth population with social, political capital, but it's not an educated type of capital. So you have to understand that for many years, the young Nigerian has been unintentionally miseducated. Right? So there is that sense of knowledge gap that I think it's not helping them make quality decisions. When you look at the NSAS movement, there was a lot of energy around it, but is it being channeled into something that can be concrete? There was a challenge of leadership, and even right now, what we're seeing in the political space, there are still unresolved traumas that came out of that. Some people have moved on, some people japped, but the reality of on ground is a lot of young Nigerians, a lot of political voters or electorate in general have a knowledge gap. They don't know the right questions to ask. Most of them are not fully educated. Sometimes when you look at the structure of education, if it's a primary education, you're not necessarily looking at the federal government or the state government or the local government. There's a way the entire system is designed. The local government becomes responsible for the primary education or the primary health care. Then you have the state government who have to do things at the state level. Then you have the federal government, and they're the counterpart funding that helps to drive secondary school. So if you don't understand, you probably will be asking the president to fix a road that is a local government responsibility. So that knowledge gap is there. Also, but I think so. What is changing is people are beginning to think or see possibility in numbers. The Nigerian education electoral process have highly been induced by money, and I don't think it's going away because even when we're running, I remember going to this particular local government where they had to hijack our cars and they won't let us leave because we didn't pay. They said we abused the place and we didn't pay, and people came. You understand? They were well entertained by our policies and everything. Apparently, nobody was interested in policy. At this time, we did not know. So when we realized we couldn't leave and they wanted us to sort boys, I had this moment where one person said, "See, you guys have to drop money before you leave here today." I now say, "No, that's not our party because we often say we don't give money, right? And that we want to work for the people." So I told the guy, "We're not interested in giving you money. Rather, if you have names of people in your community who don't have jobs, that's the conversation we can now start talking about." And the guy was like, "They called us jobless." And then the thing went, jobless, jobless. And I saw sticks and stones. In that moment, you're thinking, okay, I'm not running again. Tonight, I quit. But I don't know what happened. The next morning, you're back on the street. Like, you're like, we need to go, we need to go. So it's like a drug. You just keep going. And there was this other community too where we went to. we're trying to paste our posters, and some guys came and said we're not allowed because they were licensed by themselves. Nobody licensed them. They were licensed to post on everybody's behalf. So you pay them to do posting for you, right? You're done posting your posters in the morning. By evening, some other party that printed way more than you can ever print have covered everything. So the poster wall, right? Sometimes you have all these things that you have to put on the road and they have to fall again. So I think it was really an entire process. But if we can spend time to educate the people long ahead of time, so they're not having to struggle to decide because they've been taught how to think. There is a sense that a lot of young Nigerians really don't know how to think when it comes to political discourse. They just know what to say or how is the discourse. They're not thinking intentionally through process of what this can be. And I think that's where we have a gap. Education, and it shows like this come in handy because for every movement, there has to be an education to feed that flame and to make it become productive. So there is a sense that yes, it's a transition period. A lot of young Nigerians are clamoring for change. For those who don't want to japa, they want to fight to heal or keep the country. But what would help that become even more productive is that people are well educated about what the decisions are.
Talking about gaps, there's a trend, and so you know how they say history repeats itself. I'm a Christian, and so even in the Bible, certain things that happened in the past repeats itself. And for our non-Christian listeners and viewers, this is just an analogy. So, for instance, the people of Israel say they were tired of the priests. We want a king. We want a king, and they got a king. They got Saul, and then they found out this wasn't what we wanted. In 2014, 2015, a lot of young Nigerians were like, corruption is so high, we don't like what's going on with insecurity, we want change, we want a new president. Some people wanted someone else. But young Nigerians, a lot of them got the president they asked for, while some didn't. And 8 years down the line, or 7 years down the line, they now realize that maybe we didn't ask the right questions. Maybe we weren't intentional enough when we were asking for what we wanted. What mistakes did we make in 2015 that you see repeating itself in the 2023 cycle?
I think the first mistake that is repeating itself, a lot of young Nigerians don't have a holistic view about politics or governance. So when they want to change, they look at the presidency, but the president is incapacitated if the National Assembly is not aligned with him. Most of what we are grappling with, whether it is power, insecurity, education, are first as a result of not having the appropriate bills or the right policies in place that can allow for that thing to resolve. So if the National Assembly is not fully aligned in terms of the ideology and the vision that the president is coming to accomplish, the president is already impotent by design. So we need to expand the conversation and trust and help people understand that when you vote for the governor and you vote, you're not asking the same question for the person in the house. Whatever the governor is trying to do might not cascade to you. When you're voting for someone in the Senate and you have somebody else in the House of Representatives, you have to be basically looking to those guys as well. Many of them are career politicians too, and I think that we're talking about an unemployment rate that's about 35%, one of the highest in the world. We're talking about a digital economy where the world is really moving very quickly. We're talking about a decentralized world, smart contracts, smart chain. Everything is changing, but have the people deciding the quality of the future have no clue and not in tandem with the world or the changing world. There's already a mismatch. So young Nigerians have to have a holistic view about that. There is also a sense that we tend to, because we've not been very exposed to good governance, there is a sense that we exaggerate the importance of government in our lives. There are many things that I think even in functional countries, you go to Britain where they have solid democracy, they're still grappling with some things. So many things are not just the problem of a president leaving and coming. What we talk about is the systemic ineptitude, the dysfunction in the system. If we think that 30% of our national budget is consumed in the National Assembly, we then need to ask ourselves, why are they overpaid and underworked? Why are they taking away so much money? Because on one level, the country cannot even afford to keep that type of bicameral legislation that we've been operating for many years. Why bicameral in the first place? Can we have one, not two? So these questions are important. Why are they being paid? Can they have part-time job? We don't need everybody sitting in Abuja and getting a new car, a new house we don't need that kind of stuff. So those questions are not being asked, right? So if you look at our national budget again, 70% of our national budget is still going to recurrent. So when you drill into the recurrent, you now start seeing padded budgets, padded contracts. And so what we consider developmental fund is 30%. And out of that 30%, another 40% or 50% of that is not being used for what it's supposed to be used for. So if we just can allow the country work, where the budget allocated for roads, execute that road, right? You would find that there is a sense that the country might be coming along very well, right? But what we are seeing is that there is now that conspiracy is a rigged system. Nigeria is actually mortgaged. In fact, the whole Nigeria political space and governance is a crime scene.
Right. So you speak about crime scene and sort of trying to clear things up. And I'm going to try and link this back to something else that we were speaking about before we were rolling, which is about ownership. Because it's only ownership that I feel could help drive this through and through. If you feel a sense of ownership, then hopefully you're sort of wanting to see a logical conclusion. But you've also referred, or you've also sort of pointed to something else, which is that we tend to take on a more decentralized or a sort of amoebic kind of a nature when it comes to our involvement in politics.
I think it's a Gen Z type thing, though.
Yes. Now, the funny thing is, I actually think it is representative or indicative of, like, what the new generation comes like. How then do we do you have any ideas as to how we can build ownership in such a decentralized system? Because you also make reference to NSARS, which, I mean, people have different sort of opinions about it, but we can all agree perhaps did not have that pointed, easily identifiable ownership structure to say these are those who are driving.
Because people did not want to die. See people whose accounts got blocked, people who were refused to travel because of that. And so, I mean, I do have a bit of sympathy and understanding.
Yeah.
I was very active during the NSAS conversation, and people left traumatized like you. So we are still recovering from it till today. After October 2020, I left Twitter because I was like, what's the point? If we've done everything they say we are not doing, and then this still happens. But just like whenever we can't talk about NSAS without talking about NSAS, but please.
You are right. And that's a reality that everyone is going to have to grapple with. Again, we saw that there was a memorial trial that was, there was an attempt at some sort of a memorial, and it also met similar sort of similar dispositions,
gas, water cannons,
exactly, and things like that. So we can get that, but the outcome still needs to be safeguarded, and there still need to be people who drive it. So I'm curious as to what you think could be a solution with this new thing.
Well, I think that while we want to emphasize ownership, what we can also try to put on the table is collaboration.
Right.
NSAS didn't seem to have that on a very strategic level. I mean, I remember being in some of the groups where the activists would not let the strategists decide how the operation is going to run. And a lot of the activists who were the front line were celebrities, but they were not necessarily strategic. So they wanted to match every day of the week, but there was no conversation. Nobody wanted to sit on the table with the government. If they call for who is sitting down at the table, nobody's coming. In fact, if you attempt to sit down, they'll stone you, like you shouldn't be sitting down there. So they wanted it to go on and on and on. Because on one level, they asked that the NSAS be removed, and it was done on the level, in as much as we know a name change doesn't a change make, right? But at the end of the day, they kind of removed that, but there was no coherent center. And then many times when you have the activists with the energy who can mobilize, and they're not able to listen to the thinkers who can actually bring together, and then the storytellers who can shape the ideology and sustain the conversation in a very healthy way, you find that there is already a delicate, it will come apart at the seams, right? But what is very important is, in terms of ownership, I would say collaboration would help. The other part of it is that when we stay away from political party and we want to transform an entire governance, we have already failed. We're late to the party. Because at the end of the day, you made a point. The primaries is actually what determines who become your president. At the end of the day, we are always forced to choose between two lesser evil. Like, who is lesser evil here? Can I put up with this or the other one? Because nobody is present. So young people don't see partisan politics as an essential part of the political process. They wait for the partisan politicians to do what they need to do. We come late in the party to decide what they've chosen for us. We have to select. Do you understand? So it's not an election, it's more a selection. Because at the end of the day, you were watching the primaries of most parties and you'll be wondering, is this where it's going? And I know for a fact, if I was sitting down there, I would never be bought. In my own opinion, if I'm in this party too, but nobody was there, everybody had a price. And the guys that in their 50s, 60s, they're on their way out. They can't be bothered, right? They don't even think that if we're thinking this man is the change, most of them don't share your sentiments. Their pessimism has become second nature. They've normalized the chaos. They can thrive even in this chaos. They don't care what you're thinking. So we need to then take that conversation away from just about changing the political system to getting involved even more at the primary level. How many young people today have tickets? We were talking about the cost of even running. Some tickets were going for about 100 million. Now, take a guy in his 30s who have never stolen in his life. I'm not sure you can come up with 100 million that you've worked up and saved, except, of course, we will not go there, right? But except you have a political godfather who is able to write out the cost for you. But if our political process is too expensive, the people you're electing already compromise because they will have to borrow money to get there. And when they get there, they will spend the first 4 years paying the money they borrowed, and then spend the next part of the administration gathering the money for the next election. So we're already sabotaging ourselves when we allow this entire money-driven approach to politics to continue, right? And it was very expensive. You go to communities, you bring bag of rice, you bring this. In fact, some people will take your rice and put it in another party's bag. You understand? Because those ones have, but they'll come with big bags. So if you think that's our party's rice, don't put it there. But at the end of the day, the electorates they are in it for the spoil. They go from one rally to another rally, just gathering the souvenirs, right? Nobody's listening to the conversation. But it comes again to the fact that I don't personally think our parties are defined on a very ideological, visionary point. If I'm in America, I understand what the Democrats represent. I understand what the Republicans represent. But I can't exactly see the same thing on a level. I would have thought that the present administration seemed to have more socialist slant. But I'm also looking at areas where I would have thought that a party that has an inclination for welfareism should be able to navigate. But I'm not seeing them show up in those areas. So there's no consistency to be able to defend that as a coherent ideology, right? If you look at the other party and you say, oh, these ones are a bit more, they have a more capitalistic or business approach. They want to privatize the entire economy. In the past, when they privatize, they buy this whole thing by themselves. So I can't even say that they understand privatization as being able to allow meritocracy to thrive. There is still that part of it. So yeah, ownership, collaboration is very important, not just ownership. Partisan involvement, not just waiting for the general election.
So let's talk about the rural areas. We're talking about education. I spoke to someone recently who plans to run, and he was saying he spoke to an older colleague who is running for office, and the person said, all these campaigns you guys are doing for the next 5 months, you're wasting your money. I've bought all I want to share, and I'll wait a week before the election, and I'll go to my village and I'll give them water pumps, I'll give them generators, in the last week, and they'll forget about every other person's 5 months and vote for me. The role of the rural areas, the people who are affected the most right now, while they're floods, while people are being displaced, most people in the urban areas. I was in Asaba last week, and at least within the city center in Delta State, people were still moving freely. The people who are affected the most are the ones who are easily bought. How is there any hope that would change? Is there any hope that at one point the goats will get tired of being pushed to the wall and will finally bite the oppressor? Do you see any change in sight?
Honestly, I think most of the people in the rural areas have been far too conditioned to what they know to want to think of something new. I like to think of the people coming, the younger ones, and I'm saying, can we begin from now to educate them that there's power in their choice? They have a primal power to choose. That they have a sense of self-worth, and that they should not just allow themselves to be used by politicians every 4 years.
Permit me to ask you a slightly troublesome question. A couple of years ago, I went to Kaduna, and I had a very interesting conversation with a friend of mine, and he said something that I won't forget. He said, part of the problem is that in the South, or Southwest, there is a sense that those up north are not educated. And as such, that's reflective of like their political decisions, their economic decisions. And then he says they're just not literate in English, but they are quite educated. And ever since he said that, I found that to be a very interesting reframing of education and exposure as it sort of translates to politics. The one thing that I see that tends to bridge that gap is our cultural dispositions, our attitudes, which again you sort of allude to when you say you went to the villages and people were holding your car to say, pay us before you leave. So I guess I have two questions for you. One is if you could walk us through sort of your own experience highlighting the different players you came across. I think that would be interesting to then, as a second question, highlight some of those cultural, what you would identify as some of those cultural things that underpin our behavior. Because as Andy said, in the rural areas, they have a different price than we do, but a price all the same. So perhaps there are a few things that run through us that find different expressions. So I'm curious as to what you would think of that, your opinions of that, and your experience.
Okay, I would want to even address the first statement you made that in the North, people are more educated but not necessarily literate. I think it's going to be a bit of a tension for me to split both. I think what a lot of the people in the North have is a certain type of political awareness. They have a political intelligence that is almost intuitive. They are all able to galvanize and fall behind any candidates at any point in time. You can't say that for the South.
What do you think is responsible for that? I'm curious.
And I think that the South, and I'm from the South, so I understand clearly, it's just a highly independent way of approaching life. The entire traditional system, in parts of the Igbo culture, you can't even find a king. They actually will tell you that the kingship is a contraption, is not native to them because each family had an autonomy. So that is part of it, right? So when you move from the North to the South, the culture difference is huge. The religious difference is huge. You start finding different patterns. But the North has been able to capitalize on that difference to their advantage. The South, on the other hand, can't even fall behind anybody. Everybody will run. You understand? You can't even say, for the longest time, people were telling people from the Southwest and Southeast, can you guys give one person? Nobody's agreeing to that. Everybody will run. So it's just the nature of things. It can work when it's entrepreneurship, but it's very dangerous when you come into politics because there has to be a cohesive center.
Fantastic. There is one more question that I want to ask, and it's slightly tangential, but I think it's something that's important, and I'll just give it a little background to it. I've been very intrigued by the women in the room. Now, what I mean the women in the room is I find myself looking at pictures from political events, and I'm looking at who are the women in those pictures. Because I find that women have historically in Nigeria played a very interesting role when it comes to change transformation over time, including the NSAR, including the NSAR's phenomenon. There was a very strong discernible...
The feminist coalition led
a lot of those things.
Yeah.
Flinging it back to about women's riots. And we've seen that women have always played a very interesting role. So I'm curious as to what your take is and what, if you by any chance have any unique experiences or takeaways as it pertains particularly to women and political participation and how you see that sort of for the future. I'm curious.
I think it's on two fronts. One, I'm an advocate for inclusion,
right,
but I also think it shouldn't come at the cost of meritocracy. And I think in as much as we know we need more women, I'm hoping that more women will show up, right, in places where they can run. So it's not like I'm a woman, therefore I'm entitled. It's that today, women are leading companies, women are CEOs, and they're doing just as much. I like the conversation, but I always try to navigate away from the place of entitlement, where women, therefore, give us 40%. I think it's really about a world where the women are at the forefront and they're not discriminated against by their gender. And it's something to keep educating the men about, because a man would tell a woman, I have your type at home. No one should say that. Right? Your wife, yes, you are the head of your home when you're home. But if she's better than you at work, she'll be your boss. And your ego should handle that. Right? So our men have to take the traditional cap when they're in the corporate and political space. Politics is not about tradition, or in as much as we're cultural people. But if you see a woman who is competent at it, no one should stop her. She deserves all of our support. But I will hope that the conversation has sometimes been stretched to the extreme, where people are seeing it as the battle of the sexes. I don't think it's the battle of the sexes. A woman doesn't have to lose for a man to win. And I think that we have to be able to have that conversation where we see the differences, the diversity, and the strength and the contribution of each person, regardless of their gender, honor and respect it, and benefit from it.
I think that's a great place to leave it. Ferdinand, thank you so much for joining us on the update. It's been a pleasure hearing and learning from you. Where can people find you online?
I'm not very strong. I'm not so Twitter, but Ferdinand Adimefe is my handle on all platforms. Ferdinand Adimefe, Twitter, Instagram, all of it.
You can find me at Andy Madaki on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And where can
You
they
can't
find
find me.
That's the update, and that's today's episode. Catch us soon for the next episode. Thank you.
Yeah.